It was an almost unbelievable project, the most secret one of the Nazi regime, the Lebensborn program, meaning spring or source of life, to give birth to children who were seen as perfect in the eyes of the Nazis. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed, creating a master race, the dream of Adolf Hitler. In 1935, Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, launched the program, setting up a network of nurseries in Germany, Austria and France. Women who were pregnant by a member of the SS invited to go to the centres towards the end of their pregnancies to give birth. All had to pass pseudo-scientific tests to prove that they met the racial purity criteria defined by the regime. The Lebensborn project was brought to a halt with the liberation and the fall of the Third Reich. But in 10 years, around 20,000 babies were born in the Nazi maternity hospitals. In March 1948, at the end of the 8th Nuremberg trial, the 4 leaders of the Lebensborn project were charged with crimes against humanity. They pleaded not guilty. They claimed that they ran a charitable organisation that helped mothers in difficulty to give birth. They were convicted, but only for their membership of the SS. As for the children of Lebensborn, well, most of them only discovered their true origins much later, sometimes only a few years ago, even now in their 80s. To this day, they are the last category of victims of Nazism not to have been officially recognised. Well, Anne Mailliet with Nick Holdsworth revisit Lebensborn for France 24.
For decades, Dick Kessler has concealed his family history and the circumstances of his birth in 1944. It's the first time he's attending the annual reunion of children born in a Lebensborn home, the Nazi maternity hospitals where women, pregnant by members of the SS, gave birth far from the war and the heavily bombed cities of Germany.
With my birth, the objectives of Lebensborn were attained. Paragraph 2. The association's charitable purposes are A. To support racially and genetically pure families, and B. To accompany racially and genetically pure mothers-to-be.
Dirk Kessler collected and recorded his mother's memories before she died. He has written a book about the lies and shame that surrounded his childhood, but he has only just begun to lift the veil of secrecy around his origins. Until he was a teenager, his mother led him to believe that his father was a non-commissioned officer who had died on the Western Front, but his real father was in fact in the SS and a Lebensborn manager. She was a secretary in the organisation, which only certified Aryans could join.
This document was required to join the SS or any other senior position in the Nazi administration. It was used to prove that there had been no Jews in your family since 1785.
Dirk learned the truth about his birth in a Lebensborn very late in life, and that his father was a Nazi. His exact role is still unknown, but the aim of these hospitals was clear: the birth of what the Nazis saw as perfect children.
Without the SS, I wouldn't exist. I simply wouldn't exist. Even if the Lebensborn program was not widespread, the worldview underlying this project was absolutely crucial to their National Socialist ideology. For them, it was all about making the German people racially pure according to their criteria.
The first nurseries, like the one in Vennegerode, opened their doors as early as 1936. The SS, a key part of the Nazi regime, dreamed of a Third Reich populated by 120 million Germans. members were encouraged to engage in multiple extramarital relationships. Georg Lilienthal, a specialist in Nazi medicine and author of a leading book on the Lebensborn, says this was a pro-natalist policy designed above all to ensure the continuity of the regime.
Himmler
wanted to lower the abortion rate. They wanted to conquer Europe and the world. And to do that, they needed people. But the birth rate amongst married women in Germany was utterly insufficient. So they began to wonder how they could produce children and then recruit them.
And let's not forget the casualties of war. The war was costing the lives of many people. And soldiers, of course, so there was a lack of men to fill the regime's losses.
Yes, that's right.
Like Dirk Kessler, more than 20,000 children were born in these Nazi nurseries. By 1945, more than 20 Lebensborn hospitals had been established in Germany and in the occupied territories, in Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, France and Austria. Secret locations like the Lebensborn Hospital in Feitenbach in the Austrian Alps, where over 1,000 women from all over Europe gave birth.
Hello. We're lucky with the weather.
4 years ago, a team of researchers examined this aspect of Nazi eugenics in Austria for the first time. Nadezhda Stoffers and her colleagues interviewed dozens of people, including Helga, the illegitimate child of a 17-year-old girl who fell in love with her boss, a policeman 15 years her senior.
When my mother found out she was pregnant by this forbidden relationship, she suffered greatly and was ostracized. For her, the Lebensborn was a godsend.
Her mother, who has since died, carefully saved all the documents linked to her pregnancy, such as the Lebensborn guidebook and photos of a Nazi christening-style ceremony.
This was the moment the Nazi society officially welcomed a newborn child. The godmother and mother had to repeat, "I pledge to raise my child according to National Socialist ideology."
Though often impossible to determine the extent to which mothers adhered to the Lebensborn programme, these women had to undergo an exhaustive selection process. Nadezhda Stoffers and her team from the Ludwig Boltzmann Research Institute have collected numerous documents, including recruitment forms designed to assess their racial purity.
Then there are the questions about the mother's racial appearance. In this case, it's noted rigorous build, Nordic type. The physical traits of individuals are clear, according to the Nazi ideology.
While the SS was organising the extermination of Europe's Jews, it was also selecting the regime's future elite. Two sides of the same coin, she says.
On the one hand, there was forced sterilization and other measures to exterminate those considered undesirable. And on the other, support programs for certain mothers and the organization of Lebensborn for those deemed desirable. One cannot exist without the other. We know that at least 3 children born in this Lebensborn, but who did not correspond to these criteria, were euthanized.
Most of the women involved in the Lebensborn programme kept silent after the war, but some never recovered. In her graphic novel, Illustrator Isabelle Marget tells the story of her Norwegian grandmother Gerda, who fell in love with a German soldier and gave birth to her mother in a Lebensborn.
How did I find out my mother was in that place? We always knew my mother was Norwegian, adopted, arrived in France at the age of 2, but everything else was a big secret.
It was only after giving birth that her grandmother realised that she had been used by the soldier. She fled with the help of her family and decided to give the child up for adoption in the south of France.
I clearly see my mother as a victim, and my grandmother especially. She was used for her womb, her status as a childbearer.
Victim is a word that also resonates with Frank Gerard. He read Isabelle Marget's book and sees similarities with the fate of his own grandmother.
I never saw her smile, except on the day she died. She knew she was leaving and gave me the first smile of her life. You can understand all the suffering behind it, all the atrocities these women may have suffered.
Like Isabelle Marget's mother, more than 10,000 children are thought to have been born in the Lebensborn nurseries in Norway, considered by the Nazis to be the cradle of a superior Nordic race. Gerda blamed herself all her life. But it wasn't until the 2000s that the Mailliet family discovered the truth about her origins and the fate of her Norwegian grandmother, who sank into depression.
In 1945, there were 59 births, which means that they believed in it right up to the end. This Norwegian Lebensborn was still active. So I think it's important to talk about this, to realize just how far Nazi madness went, the extent to which we're still not free of those dangers of those words today. It still resonates.
80 years after the end of the war, the fate of these children, born at the heart of the Nazi system, is gradually coming to light. Some grew up in France. A dozen of them, abandoned in Lebensborn maternity wards at the end of the war, were found in Bavaria, then taken to Commercy in the Meuse region of northeastern France to be adopted. The local authority and the National Office for Veterans and Victims of War now hold a day of remembrance for them. This year, Isabelle Marget and Dirk Kessler were invited by the local high school to share their story and to learn that of Giselle Nyango, born in a Lebensborn in Belgium.
Ah, is that you?
Giselle was one of the children sent to Commercy. Her story has inspired a play.
Vous êtes vraiment frères et sœurs?
C'est une façon de parler. Disons qu'on vient du même genre d'endroit.
C'est-à-dire?
Dans Lebensborn.
I find this day surprisingly joyful, even if the story is sad. But at least young people are interested in this story hidden for many years. It seems to interest a lot of people.
The children and grandchildren of Lebensborn, born throughout Europe, today pay tribute to the orphans of Commercy, some of whom may never know the full truth of their origins.
Between 20,000 and 25,000 children were born in these factories throughout Europe. There were countless victims of this tragedy, and this eugenics policy would have repercussions in years to come.
Those responsible for Lebensborn were never convicted by the courts of the Allied victors of the war. In Germany, these children, like Dirk Kessler, are simply seen as collateral damage of war. Only Norway has belatedly recognised the victim status of children born in Nazi maternity hospitals, but France could be next. Frank Menonville, a senator for the Meuse region, is drafting a bill.
It's absolutely essential. It allows us to try and protect ourselves because, unfortunately, we see it a few thousand kilometers away. where Ukrainian children are being taken from their homeland to be Russified, and this is another form, unfortunately, similar to this tragedy.
It may be a belated recognition, but it is more relevant than ever, at a time when children in Europe are once again the victims of a rogue regime. Ukrainian authorities say that nearly 20,000 children have been taken from the country since the start of the Russian invasion. If the children of Lebensborn are testifying today, it is also for them.
We all have a duty to remember, so that these things never happen again. But they are, as we're talking about in Ukraine.
These children are being Russified. It's exactly the same idea as the Nazis at the time, because with the war, which Russia itself started, thousands of people and thousands of soldiers are dying. Like the Nazis, they need cannon fodder.
At 80, Dirk Kessler continues to study his parents and their role in the Lebensborn organisation. He just discovered in the Federal Archives that his father may also have been involved in Nazi child thefts across occupied Europe.
Anne Mailliet with Nick Holdsworth, revisiting Lebensborn for France 24. Well, that's all from this week's edition. Don't forget, of course, you can catch it again on our website. That's at france24.com. Thanks for watching. More news coming up.